Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for joining us for the United States launch of the Teaching and Learning International Survey 2013. My name is Melinda George, and I'm the president of the National Commission on Teaching in America's Future, or as we affectionately call it, NCTAF. We are delighted to co-host this launch with OECD, an organization which continues to offer a wealth of research to inform education systems around the world. Through its newest report, TALIS, OECD has highlighted the voice of teachers to provide a global selfie, as they call it in their teacher's guide, which you now have, or a snapshot of what teachers believe, how they work, and how they feel about the work they do. For the past 20 years, the Commission has focused on what matters most, and that is ensuring that every student has access to quality and caring teachers in schools organized for success. Our history is as an organization that conducts research, makes recommendations, and objectively shares best practices of quality teaching, while also lending our national voice to bring about positive change for the teaching profession. And who knows what constitutes quality teaching better than those who are in the classroom every day, working with the next generation. This is why we are so excited to be part of this important launch. NCTAF is proud to be a TALIS partner for three important reasons. First, we support and want to promote the importance of the teacher voice in building and strengthening the teaching profession. Second, we want to raise visibility about this important survey. We want to make sure that teachers across this country know what TALIS is and why it's important to participate. And third, we want to take this important data and the information that we're now sharing with all of you and make it useful and available to all teachers and school leaders so that they're able to use it to impact their own working conditions, to truly organize their schools for success. The TALIS provides data that allows deep insight straight from teachers and school leaders about what is important to educators, where there are challenges, and where there are opportunities for growth. We can align what we have learned from U.S. teachers in this survey with information from teachers and educators in other TALIS countries. Where are those countries reporting success? And how can we use this data to realize similar success in U.S. schools? This information is critical for all of us that care about education, and I assume that's why all of you are here today. We want to emphasize that we need American teachers and school leaders to know about this important study, and importantly, to be ready to participate in TALIS 2018. This is your chance to make your voice heard. As I reviewed the TALIS data, I was very pleased to see a positive picture emerging across TALIS countries, and particularly among American teachers around their satisfaction and confidence levels. We have an opportunity to build on this data, as well as looking at the areas that need to be improved. And you're going to hear about that today. TALIS helps us to understand what leads to teacher satisfaction and should make us all think about what we can do to encourage entry and retention in the teaching profession. Since its founding, NCTAF has identified collaboration as critical to schools organized for success and to the ability of teachers to be successful. The desire for and power of collaboration was evident throughout the TALIS findings. And yet, in the United States, teaching is still reported as a largely independent profession. This seems to be an area where improvement could and should be made. The NCTAF Commission has long promoted the need for a collaborative working environment in schools. Whether that plays out as teachers with their peers, teachers and school leaders, teachers and students, or all of the above, this is a critical element in organizing schools for success. We need more models, case studies, and examples of where and how collaboration is making a difference. 2013 was the first time that the United States participated in the TALIS survey, and we invited you all here today in the hopes that you will share this data widely in your networks and communities. NCTAF believes TALIS should be highly regarded and as well known as other international comparisons because it really provides insight from people that know what's happening, from teachers and school leaders who are the linchpin in the school learning environment. As you are listening to today's presentations and panel discussion, what we need you to do is think about your constituencies. What are they going to want to know from this data? Who in your networks can this impact? What other groups should be involved? We all have power and responsibility here for making the voices of teachers heard, and heard loudly. We can empower teachers and school leaders to create learning environments that are engaging to all students. One of the other things as part of this sharing is I would encourage you all to join on Twitter using the hashtag #OECDTALIS. And if you wouldn't mind, be sure to mention @NCTAF and @OECD_EDU. I want to again express NCTAF's appreciation to OECD for focusing on teaching and creating this important survey and report. It's now my pleasure to introduce Andreas Schleicher, who will present the general findings from the survey. Andreas is the Director for Education and Skills to OECD's Secretary General. He is familiar to many of us because he oversees many of the reports that are used across the world to provide benchmarks for education and guidelines for improvement. These include PISA, PIAC, and now TALIS. Andreas also has a passion for education and learning through data that is unmatched, and a stamina that allows him to travel the world. He flew in from Tokyo this morning, I believe around 11, to share these important findings. Please join me in welcoming Andreas.
Good afternoon, and I want to start by thanking Melinda and NCTAF for hosting this event. This is such a fantastic partner for getting the message out on our work on teachers. I want to also acknowledge my colleague Christian Weatherby, who's really been the driving force behind all of this work on our work on teachers. TALIS is really the latest child in the family of OECD surveys, and the idea is, as Melinda said, to add the teacher's voice to what we know from the perspective of students through PISA or through administrative data that we collect through other sources. To do that, we collected data from over 100,000 teachers around the world, representative samples to ensure that we can compare the data with accuracy in an internationally standardized survey. This is just a map of the countries that took part, with which you can compare data from the United States. It's a fairly impressive number of countries that have joined this effort, and it's going to grow over the next few years. The idea really is to advance the teaching profession. This is sort of the fundamental idea of the survey, to ensure that countries can recruit the best and brightest into the teaching profession, to support them well, and to ensure that they have attractive career perspectives, to recognize good teaching, great teachers, to make sure that they're respected, and not least to improve also the societal view on teachers. And let me start with this. We basically surveyed teachers to ask them themselves to what extent they believe that the teaching profession is a valued profession in society. And these are the results. If you are in Malaysia, in Singapore, in Korea, in Abu Dhabi, or in Finland, you can expect that 2/3 or more of teachers will tell you they believe society values the teaching profession. If you're in the United States, it's about 1/3, and that's about the average. So the majority of teachers does not have the impression society values their work. Now you can say, well, that's just a view of teachers, so how do we know? Well, you know, one thing that's really interesting, if you square those data with PISA, the share of top performers on PISA. You see on the horizontal axis the share of teachers who agree that teaching is valued. On the vertical axis, the share of top performers on learning outcomes. And you can see those things line up quite well. So That, of course, leaves the question, what's the nature of the causal relationship? And those kind of surveys don't give you the answer to this. It could well be that, where society really values education, you're going to get the best people applying for jobs and they're going to do a great job. It's one interpretation. The other interpretation is, where teachers really do a good job and students learn something, society is going to reward that with valuing the profession. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, but it's interesting that those two dimensions really line up. The value society places on education and to the teaching profession seems to be relating to outcomes. But let's start with some of the more detailed results. Everybody talks about 21st century skills, rising demand, and 21st century skills require 21st century pedagogies. What are teachers' beliefs in pedagogy? Let's first of all have a look at the change, the evolution of skill demand. You can see a decline in the demand for manual skills in our labor markets. Now, that's what we know since a long time. Machines are doing better than humans to do that kind of work. But the steepest decline in the demand for skills is not on the manual sector, but in what we call routine cognitive skills. The kind of things that are easy to teach, the kind of things that are easy to test, are also losing most rapidly in value on the US labor market. That's the dilemma for teaching and education. We see an increase in the demand for non-routine analytical skills. This is your capacity not just to reproduce what you learn, but to extrapolate, to apply your knowledge in novel settings, and also interpersonal skills, social skills, rising in importance. So this is what is placed on the demands for teachers. So what do teachers believe about 21st century pedagogies? Well, actually it's quite consistent across countries. 9 out of 10 teachers see their role as one of facilitator of students' own inquiry. 9 out of 10 teachers say that students should be allowed to think of solutions to practical problems themselves before the teacher shows them how they are solved. That's the average across countries. US teachers are pretty typical. No? US teachers are pretty similar to the average teacher around the world. There is some variability, but actually not that much. If you're in Singapore, you're always going to be at the frontier. You'll see Singapore, Korea, Japan on many of the dimensions at the top, but more or less teachers around the world have this vision that, it's all about inquiry and teachers are the facilitators. Now, that's what teachers think about 21st century pedagogies. Is that what's actually happening in classrooms? Well, we ask teachers that question too. And you can see those numbers are actually a lot lower. No? For example, when you ask yourself, students work in small groups to come up with a joint solution to a problem or task. The value placed on social skills, this is the kind of settings where you can make those things work. It's just about half of the teachers who say that they use those methods frequently or nearly always. In the US is, again, a quite typical picture. There's some variability in this. If you're in Brazil, if you're in Norway, in Chile, that's very frequent. If you're in Korea and Italy, those settings are rarer. And again, students work on projects that require at least 1 week to complete. Advanced thinking skills require pedagogical settings that are complex, that take time. Now, this is not about 1 minute type of task. And you can again see that's happening in around 40% of the settings in the US, 30% on average across countries. If you're in Australia and Chile, it's happening more. Sweden, if you are in Croatia, it's happened almost never, according to teachers. So again, pedagogical beliefs are quite similar across countries. Their realization in classrooms, much more limited. I want to show you one chart. This is not from TALIS, from PISA, to show you just that these things can actually change. We looked at the capacity of students to solve tasks where they need to reproduce knowledge, multiple choice tasks, and tasks where they needed to create knowledge. And then I show you what happened in terms of changes. When you look at the OECD average, you can see students got better in solving kind of traditional tasks, reproducing knowledge, and they got faster better on tasks requiring open-ended solutions. But if you look at Japan as an example, you can see actually that the growth in this has been phenomenal. That's what Japan focused on. And they were disappointed when they got their first PISA results that their students were not very good in solving open-ended complex tasks. They focused on that, they did this. And I show you this because it tells you that you can change the instructional paradigms in classrooms in a course of a few years. Quite amazing. So pedagogical beliefs and their realization are important. Teacher collaboration. Many of those solutions that are needed in 21st century pedagogies require teachers to work together. Now, this is not something you can do in your own subject or in your own classroom alone. Let's have a look. We asked teachers to what extent they do those certain things at least once per month. And you can see when it comes to exchange and coordination, this is the average. That happens frequently, teachers sharing information, discussing things, and so on at a practical level. When you look at kind of deeper professional collaboration, that is really important. It's not so common. Team teaching, around 20%. Collaborative problem solving less, joint activities, and classroom observation, just 1 in 10 say that they do this at least once per month. So exchange and coordination, teachers talk a lot in schools, no? Deep professional collaboration, rarer. And this is how the US stacks up. I think the only dimension where the US is really different from the average countries is there is more happening in terms of collaborative professional development, which is a very positive indicator, less on classroom observation. There's variability across countries. If you're in Japan, if you're in Norway and so on, you can see that team teaching is a very common phenomenon. Teachers do this, at least 50% of the teachers do this at least half per month. If you are in Israel, or in the United Arab Emirates, Australia or Singapore, and the US, collaborative professional development, professional learning communities in school are quite common. If you are in Croatia or the Netherlands, that almost never happens. No. Variability in this, but the overall picture is exchange, yes, deep professional collaboration, still quite rare. Why do I focus on collaboration? Because actually our survey shows that the more frequently teachers report taking part in collaborative practices, the higher the level of self-efficacy, their confidence in their abilities as teachers, and their job satisfaction. So collaboration seems to be related to many aspects, important aspect. How do teachers get into their job? Induction is obviously important. We looked at this from two perspectives. We looked at to what extent do induction programs in school exist, access, and to what extent do teachers actually take part. And you can see these are the two bars, and actually you can see in most countries there are a lot more opportunities than are being used by teachers. That's true for the US, that's true for virtually every country, with very, very few exceptions on this now. In Singapore, induction exists and everybody does it, but in most countries it may exist everywhere, but it's not used everywhere. No. And again, our analysis shows that induction programs are crucially important to integrate teachers into the teaching force. We ask teachers also not only whether they do participate in professional development, but also where they see their greatest needs. And you can see teaching students with special needs was the #1 on average across countries. ICT skills for teaching afterwards, new technologies in the workplace, student behavior and classroom management, teaching in a multicultural, multilingual settings, and so on. So that's basically where teachers see their greatest need for professional development. And this is the US. The pattern is similar with a couple of exceptions, but the extent to which teachers express a need in professional development is a lot lower in general. No? There is also variability across countries in this. No? For example, if you're in Japan and Korea, teachers say they really need more professional development on many of those dimensions, including teaching students with special needs. And that's quite puzzling. No? Teachers in Japan and Korea must be doing a great job because students do really well and they still want to move further. So when teachers say they don't need professional development, it doesn't mean they are great. And when teachers say they need a lot of professional development, it doesn't mean that they're not doing well. This is just sort of their desire to advance in their profession. A lot of variability in this. If you think about pedagogical competences, British teachers think, well, English teachers, they don't need that much. If you are in Italy and Korea, they want to move further in that. Knowledge of the curriculum. Korea, again, on top. Again, they're doing really well, but they want to actually develop this further. Spanish teachers don't see any need to advance on curriculum content, despite the fact that results are not that great. So again, it is very, sort of, one needs to interpret these results quite carefully. Participation in professional development and level of support received by teachers. There's a group of countries that includes the US where there is a lot happening and it's easily accessible for teachers. You don't have to pay very much. There's another group of countries where not much is happening and teachers have actually important financial barriers to participation. Again, that varies a lot across countries. Both the incidence and intensity of participation and the level of effort in terms of financing that teachers need to invest into their professional development. What's interesting is that in a fair number of countries, teachers participate despite the fact that they have to invest in this work. The question, of course, is, does it all make a difference? It's very hard to measure now. We have no direct measures, but we ask teachers themselves, do they feel that it changes pedagogical practice? And actually what we see is that over 3/4 of the teachers say that the professional development in which they participated actually has a positive impact on their teaching. Let's have a look at this in a bit more detail. First of all, no, this is on the next slide. This is the barriers. Why do you ask yourself, why do teachers not do this if it's available? No? First thing, of course, is I have no time. No? Everybody's saying this. There are no incentives for participating, also quite frequently. Professional development is too expensive, not affordable. So these are the main reasons why teachers don't pursue professional development. And American teachers are not really very different from that picture. That's sort of these are the main barriers for not doing the kind of professional development that is needed. How do teachers learn about their strengths and areas of improvement? Feedback and appraisal, crucial elements of the teaching workforce. Why are they crucial? Because again, on average across countries, half of the teachers say that receiving feedback on their teaching from 1 or 2 sources. Think about it, that's not great. No? Multiple sources are important and just half of the teachers say that's happening. Only 1 in 5 receive feedback from 3 sources. Let's have a look at this in a bit more detail. For example, when teachers have done classroom observations, now someone is coming into your classroom, who is actually going to tell you about it? Well, what teachers say is that school principals in some countries play a very important role, in the US included. No? 80% say that feedback comes from the principal. School management is another source. No? These are subject matter experts in your school, colleagues, and so on. And then, of course, you have peer teachers. And that, if you look at the US, for example, school principals tell you something, sometimes the management, but actually fellow teachers, not that often. And you could see this also earlier when you looked at the participation in classroom observations. That is not such a common phenomenon. If you are in Korea, for example, most of the feedback comes from your colleagues, from your peers. So the sources of feedback vary, as does the intensity and incidence of the kind of feedback. Who gets never any feedback? We asked that question too. And you can see, actually, it's a quite sizable share of teachers in countries where basically there's no follow-up on the analysis of student test scores or on their assessment of content knowledge, no? Or direct classroom observations. No? For example, in the US, the highest dot here is on the assessment of content knowledge. Overall, having someone who comes to your classroom, does something, and not getting any kind of feedback from this is a worrying signal, and you can see actually this is not sort of happening very rarely. And this is the chart I wanted to show you earlier. What do teachers feel is the difference that feedback makes for their work? There's a majority of teachers actually say that it has an important impact on their personal development, their confidence as a teacher, their motivation, their job satisfaction. On their pedagogical work, that's important too. Teaching practices, student assessments to improve student learning, classroom management, and so on. And even on their professional level, you can see actually there's a very large share of teachers, between 30 and 60%, depending on what you look at, who say that actually it had a moderate or large positive change in many professional areas, including public recognition, job responsibilities, and so on. So feedback seems to be really, really important from the perspective of teachers. Again, this is the average. Let's compare the United States. The bars tend to be shorter. Fewer teachers in the US report that feedback is making a difference on those kinds of dimensions. Hard to see the reasons for this. Is just sort of the picture that emerges from this. And again, the blue bar is the average. In some countries, the bars would be a lot longer. But overall, I think you can deduce from this that feedback is a very, very important source for improvement and for also self-efficacy and job satisfaction. What happens based on the feedback? Another important question. In many countries, teachers say that there is a development of a training plan to improve their work as a teacher. Now you hear something back and someone helps you to develop a training plan. A mentor is appointed to help teachers improve their teaching. Happens in around half of the cases, on average. But if you look at the last two elements, less than 40% of the teachers say that the best performing teacher in the school receives the greatest recognition. That's a worrying sign. The majority of teachers don't believe that. And also only about 30% of the teachers say that if a teacher is consistently underperforming, he or she would be dismissed. But also there is variability. The US is on this sort of, again, relatively similar except for the last point. But there is important variability across countries. For example, if you're in Singapore and Poland, you can be sure that teachers tell you, if I'm really doing a great job, I'm going to get recognition for this. Singapore and Poland sort of coming close to, or are around 9 out of 10 teachers that agree or strongly agree that the best performing teacher will also receive the greatest recognition. If you are in Spain, the Netherlands, Belgium, or Norway, very few teachers believe that. And then consistent underperformance. You are in a country like Chile, where the majority of teachers say it has consequences. In other countries, a small minority. Variability in this. But overall, particularly when you look at the lowest two bars, the link between feedback and improvement isn't necessarily strong as you would expect. Classroom environment, a couple of points on what teachers actually do. Distribution of time. And this is quite striking. When you look at the number of teaching hours, according to teachers, US teachers teach a lot more hours than teachers on average across countries. They also spend more time on other tasks, whatever they are. Whereas on planning, marking, administration, teamwork, student counseling, extracurricular activities, the picture is quite similar than other countries. High volume of teaching time. And that sort of, it's hard to square because you can say, well, the US spends so much on education. Why do teachers have to teach so much? But actually, if you look at how the resources are invested, that is the teaching load is exceptionally high. What do teachers beyond teaching? If you are in Finland, as a teacher, you don't have to worry much about school management. If you are in Malaysia, you spend 5 hours on school management. If you are in Flanders, you don't communicate it much with parents. If you're in Abu Dhabi or Finland, that's a big task for you, and so on. Extracurricular activities. In Sweden, that's not very common. If you're in Japan, you spend 8 hours working on this. There's a lot of clubs in school which are managed by teachers also to help struggling students to succeed. Huge variability across countries. Student counseling in Korea, 4 hours per week. Teamwork varies a lot. Administrative work, if you're in Finland, you're lucky, you spend less than 1 hour on this. If you're in Korea, you spend 6 hours on this. So the schedule and the division of work varies a lot across countries. Countries have different philosophies about teachers. Japanese teachers are there to help students grow in their personalities. Teaching is just one element, but they have a lot of other responsibilities. If you are in other countries, teachers are primarily defined through their teaching responsibilities. It's really, I mean, I'm going through this very quickly, but it's very interesting to look at this, what's the concept that countries have of a teacher. And of course, in the United States, the price for the rather small sizes that you have is an exceptionally large teaching load. So all of this, you can spend your money only once, and the spending factors come up to those kinds of figures. Methods of assessing student learning. We ask teachers to what extent they use certain methods of student assessment frequently or always, and you can see observing students when they are working on particular tasks. That happens nearly everywhere. In the US is even stronger on that. Developing, administering their own assessment also. The aspect where the US is different, and that might surprise you, is that teachers report actually quite infrequent use of standardized tests in the classroom on their own. That's more common in other countries. But I think it gives you a picture of the composition of the evaluation and assessment instruments that teachers tend to use. Last but not least, how do teachers feel about their jobs? Very important dimension as well. Overall, it's a very, very encouraging picture. You have 9 out of 10 teachers who say that all in all, I'm satisfied with my job. 9 out of 10 teachers say that they enjoy working at this school. 8 out of 10 teachers say they would recommend their school as a great place to work. That's really a very encouraging picture. And the US is quite similar to the teacher in other countries. Strong you can say teachers really love their work. They don't feel very much valued. You saw that initially, but they really like their job in general. There's variability across countries. If you are in Norway, you almost always recommend your school as a great place to work. If you're in Japan and Korea, just 6 out of 10 teachers say. How are teachers satisfied with their profession? The vast majority of teachers, almost 80%, say that the advantages of being a teacher clearly outweigh the disadvantage. And the same number, or the same share, tell you, if I could decide again, I would still choose to work as a teacher. So they would go into this profession again. And the US is quite similar again to the average teacher. These numbers are really quite encouraging. There's variability again. If you're in Sweden, many Swedes seem to have second thoughts, going into this again. Teachers in Spain are at the front here. But overall, the levels are quite high. I mentioned already, the factors that drive job satisfaction. I wanted to show you a couple that do not drive job satisfaction. Look at this. This is job satisfaction by class size. There's no relationship. No. Teachers of classes from 16 or less or 36 or more have the same level of job satisfaction, according to their own views. No. However, if you look at the nature of students teachers teach, now we looked at the share of behavioral problems in classes, and and by the way, the US is quite similar to this, even higher levels, you saw that before. However, the nature of the students that you have, the more there are behavioral issues in your classroom, the less satisfied teachers are with their jobs. No? And again, that's the same for the United States. So what this tells you is that it's not the number of students in the class, but the share or the magnitude of behavioral problems that drives job satisfaction. And that brings us back to the issue of classroom management being cited as one of the most important areas where teachers feel they have a need for further professional development. Work experience. This is sort of the number of years that teachers have worked as a teacher. And that is very high in Latvia, Estonia, Bulgaria, Italy, and so on, and quite low in the United States. That's because you have a high degree of turnover. So that's not really a surprise, but it's quite variable across countries. Of course, you know, the question is always to what extent you have worked in the education sector. Now, you can have done something else in teaching. You have to add that. In some countries, it's quite sizable. You also have to consider whether people have work experience in other jobs. It's quite important in the United States. So when you add all of that up, it's not necessarily the school experience, but the work experience is quite high in the United States now. The last question you can ask here is to what extent teachers, how long they have actually stayed at the school at which they teach. And that's the white dot here. And it's quite interesting. If you're in Japan or Korea, you'll change school very frequently because the education system moves you around a lot. Every 3 years, basically. They want to make sure that teachers have lots of different experiences, and they also want to distribute teaching resources fairly across the system. So you move a lot, and you can see this here. Teachers have stayed only a short period, less than 5 years at the current school. If you are in Belgium or in Croatia, you are unlikely to have been in any other school. You've been mostly stayed at the school where you're currently teaching. So what you can see here is work experience varies, but also the way in which teachers get allocated to schools is quite different. The only disappointing factor, and actually you can relate this to self-efficacy. Do teachers feel confident as a teacher? And you can see the longer you teach, the more confidence you feel to be a teacher, which is more or less what you would expect. The only caveat I would make is when you look at work experiences, in most of the countries, the most experienced teachers are not going to the most challenging schools. Education systems generally do not do a great job in attracting the most talented teachers into the most challenging classrooms. Very few exceptions, so there's more work on this to do. How much more can we do? I want to conclude with one picture from PISA, which is quite instructive of what is possible. What I've done here is marked student performance by the level of social background of the students. Now, if you are the red dot, this is Mexico, you are from the 10% most disadvantaged children, you do quite poorly. If you are from the 10% most privileged children, you do quite well on this now. And Mexico is not alone. If you're in Chile and you come from a poor family, you're actually doing worse than in Mexico. If you come from a privileged family, you do better in Chile than you do in Mexico. Social background matters. And you can see it matters everywhere in every country. And the red dots are comparable across countries, and the green dots are comparable across countries. When you now actually look at this picture overall, you can see actually the most disadvantaged children in Shanghai in China outperform the children of wealthy families in some countries, including the United States, which tells us, we could be doing a lot better in educating the children from the poorest backgrounds. Poverty is not destiny. It's a barrier in every country, but it's not destiny. And all of this comes back to the way in which we allocate teachers and the capacities they have to deal with diverse socioeconomic backgrounds. That's again why the picture that most countries do not succeed to attract teaching talent to the disadvantaged classroom is quite worrying. So once again, this is all about developing the teaching profession, helping countries recruiting talent, supporting them. You've seen that there's a lot to do to actually develop better support structures and making sure that the support structures that exist in schools are actually used. Remember the gap. To offer teachers rewarding careers, make sure that, for example, feedback and appraisal lead to something, connecting professional development with careers, and so on. And finally, in most countries, including the US, we have a lot of work to do to improve the societal view of teaching as a profession. Thank you very much.